Welcome to part 2 of Psychoanalysis, Mechanisms in Personality Disorders and Component Instincts. So far, from the Freudian conceptualized components instincts have been defined, we added on to the versions which it can create pathologies with, if not integrated well. So somewhere in the discussion, we were in the point where the concept needs a relook. And you had mentioned about how the chakra is subservient to the other when the other is anchoring crown. What else is there as a concept?
So the first point that we came across was that there is a need to relook at all that is instinctual. Because this is in direct contrast to the tabula rasa theory. Tabula rasa theory means that we are born as a blank slate, and experience and environment writes everything upon that blank slate. So we are a blank canvas and the world makes a painting on it. So that is the basis of much of all approaches in philosophy and psychology and social sciences which have come up in the last century, where it's a tabula rasa theory at the root. If you ask the question, how are we when we are born? They will say it's a blank slate. But there are many exceptions to it. Hindu spirituality is completely against it. We believe in the theory of karma and evolution and reincarnation. So there's no question of a blank slate. We come with thousands of impressions of hundreds of births. Carl Jung also was against this whole idea of the blank slate. The whole idea of the collective unconscious and the archetypal endowment which is inherited is completely against the idea of the blank slate. Freud, the moment he talks about component instincts, he talks about instincts and component instincts. He is somewhere halfway. That it is not a completely blank slate, but the specifics are not inherited. The tendencies are not inherited. The capacity for a tendency is inherited. But the tendency Freud doesn't go that far to say the tendency is inherited. So there is a constitutional inclination, but the specificity of it has to be found with subject matter and experience from outside. So in a way, if we talk about component instincts being very strong or very weak, one way to look at it is to say that it is a contradiction and opposition to the tabula rasa theory. Now, when we take a relook, one way to relook at is this. If we take Heidegger's view of how the inside is constituted, then the inside is constituted in conjunction with the outside. His idea of being and time, the person inside is constituted partly by the time in which he finds himself. And he exists in a two-way communication with the time that he finds himself in. Same is true for the psyche inside. So if we look at that kind of thing, then maybe the component instincts, or at least their intensity or their inclination of expression, maybe it is affected partly by the early experiences. Maybe that the component instincts are not fully formed, cast in stone, final entities, but maybe they partly form themselves in experience. So then the constitution of the component instincts also needs a review. That do we inherit them cast in stone, final, unchangeable, or are they open to change in experience, or are they even partly formed in experience? How far early life experiences can modify the component instincts in their nature and intensity? So this is one aspect of relook. Second aspect, as I said, was the number of component instincts. The third aspect is the manifestation of the component instincts in each of psychosexual developmental stages. How do these four manifest in the oral stage, in the anal stage, in the phallic stage, in the genital stage? Then we take them across the schools. How do these four component instincts manifest in the Kleinian framework, in the cohesion framework, in all other schools? So one need to relook at this concept is to take it across schools. If we talk of the paranoid schizoid situation, how do the component instincts relate to it? Or are they completely incompatible with those frameworks? Yet another way to look at it is to give it an evolutionary consideration. That if we inherit this, why have they survived the process of natural selection? How do they aid the evolutionary process and our processes of survival and adaptation? What is it that they do? Why are they still there? What is it that they do which we don't seem to understand, appreciate fully, that what is their valuable function? Why should this mechanism so exist that the integration happens only at puberty? And why these component instincts appear separately as component instincts? So the evolutionary significance of the way things are happening. What is it that what is happening the way it is? How does it contribute it in a valuable way to our survival and evolution? From a separate point of view, a cultural consideration, that as the social and cultural conditions change, do we see a change in the nature and intensity of component instincts and in the proportion in which they get integrated or not integrated? Let me bring in what Kohut said. Kohut said that the kind of patients he gets are very different from the kind of patients Freud got. He uses the two words, the tragic man and the guilty man. He said Freud's patients essentially were what he calls the guilty man, where excessive desire cannot be completely repressed, and therefore the difficulty of pathology. There is a guilt of too much desire. There is a guilt of an unacceptable desire. Whereas the kind of patients Kohut gets or used to get were patients with self-difficulty, with early life object losses, early life difficult object experiences. He calls them the tragic man. And this group of patients are very different from Freud's group of patients. Now, why this change is because of the change in social conditions. The sexual repression is by and large gone. At least it is less than half what it used to be in Freud's time. The acceptance of one's desire is far more than what it used to be in Freud's time. So this is where we clearly see how important culture is to pathology. That the type of patients we get, the type of pathology that exists in society itself undergoes a change. So it's not only the child, the constitution and the family, it's also the larger culture. We often talk about the causes of pathology being biopsychosocial, but we never take in the socio part seriously. But we see Kohut's conversation that how culture makes a difference, that the hysterical patients, which used to be a majority, are now an absolute minority. So it is just
And
like
in today's time, current time, you would not, you might have a combination of these, but with more of uh, it's nothing to do with guilt or the tragic, but more to do with establishing the omnipotence and grandiosity. So
correct.
more of narcissistic version of clients.
So this is exactly what Kohut said, that his patients actually are patients where narcissism is a problem, the fragility is a problem. And these problems, in his view, come because of what he says are the causes of it, which we have discussed before. The mirroring failure, the empathizing failure, the idealizing failure, and so on. Now, similarly, what does culture do to the component instincts? Are the component instincts immune to the social conditions, or are they responsive to them? And like most parts of the psyche, it is more likely they are responsive to them, and therefore, whether the cultural changes are producing a change in the nature, intensity, or the mode of integration of component instincts also needs a relook. We have not taken a relook at that. The cultural impact on the component instincts and their integration in the genital organization. And then the elemental consideration of it. The question that you asked and I could not answer. What is it that exactly causes, aids, or inhibits the integration? So if we go elemental into the component instincts, like for example, sadomasochism involves both sexuality and power. So how much of each is there in each of them, and how does it manifest across the psychosexual developmental stages? Sadism can be oral sadism, it can be anal sadism. Not necessarily both of them have the same components of sexuality and aggression. So elemental consideration of the component instincts is one more area of relook. So when you look at this whole set, this is a whole set of issues around the component instincts which need a relook, reflection, contemplation, and development. And once it is done, then we can relate it more efficiently to how these component instincts are working out in different pathologies. Say, for example, severe depression. In some certain group of people, that may be because of very high death instinct and very high masochism. Certainly, certain groups of bipolar. Very high exhibitionism can be along with very high life energy, and that can go into the very ultra feminine, softer form of bipolar personality. So when we look at these component instincts, and practically it's very important because the manifestation of component instincts on a standalone basis in action in a pathological way can lead to situations of social shame, social criticism, social distancing of people. And that can have an impact not only in terms of certain forms of blackmailing, but also in general quality of life because of the way society sees us and treats us because of our component instincts going out of control. So there is a social aspect of the quality of life also associated with this idea of component instincts.
Rewarding discussion. It brings light to the hazy concept in the corner. Hope the viewers enjoyed it. See you all again. Namaste.
Namaste.